Hey guys, Kenna here. So today we're really kind of starting to get into our key information regarding water. And we're going to talk about access to water and why water is such an important piece of our exploration of your environmental impact. So today's notes, water everywhere. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Question number one, where do we find fresh water on our planet? How does it relate to the water cycle? Question number two, what are the three types of surface water? Question number three, how are surface and groundwater related? And question number four, why is fresh water in short supply? Now, before we go ahead and start going into the notes proper, I want to give you a little bit of a case study using the Colorado River. Because when we start looking at the Colorado River, it's a major waterway here in the United States and provides a lot of water for a lot of people. But because of how we use the water, the Colorado River's availability as a water source is changing over time. Now, overuse of the Colorado River challenges state and federal agencies and the people who live in these regions. You can see here the Colorado River running from up by Boulder, Colorado, down past Grants Junction, so through Colorado into Utah, through Utah into Arizona, and even down there on the border to California and Nevada before it heads into the Gulf of California, which is down in Mexico. So, increasing population and economic development have placed increasing demands on this limited supply of water. So, where does your water come from? And how could you conserve your water use? So, this is one of the goals I have for you today. I'd really like you to go ahead and take a look at your water. Where does it come from? Okay. When you start looking at your water supply, how do you get your water and where does it come from? And when you start thinking about that, maybe you'll start thinking about your storm drain too. When you go ahead and put things into the water, where does that go to? So there's a lot of things I want you to kind of keep in mind as you go ahead and go through this. Now, when we go ahead and start looking at the Colorado River, the flow of the Colorado is dwindling due to the impacts of global heating, and this is risking severe water shortages for millions of people who rely upon America's most storied waterway. Okay. The loss of snow in the Colorado River Basin due to human induced climate change has resulted in the river absorbing more of the sun's energy, thereby increasing the amounts of water lost in evaporation. This is because snow and ice reflect back away the sun's surface, a phenomenon known as the albedo effect. The loss of albedo, as snow and ice melt away, is reducing the flow of the Colorado by about 9.5% for each 1 degree centigrade of warming. And this is according to a report published in Science. Now, the Colorado rises in the Rocky Mountains, and from there it slices through the ranch lands and canyon lands as it winds through the American West. This icon of the American West, the carver of the Grand Canyon, previously emptied into the Gulf of California in Mexico, but now it ends several miles shy due to the amount of water extraction for U.S. agriculture and cities ranging from Denver to Tijuana. The river's upper basin supplies water to about 40 million people and supports 16 million jobs. It feeds the two largest water reserves in the United States, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, with Lake Mead supplying Las Vegas with almost all of its water. Since the 19th century, the biggest users of the Colorado River have been farmers, turning millions of acres of unforgiving landscape in California and Arizona into a patchwork of green and brown visible from space. For a century, their water supply has been governed by agreements among the states along river basin. But the water itself is doled out by state administrators, and part of that is due to the first in time, first in right mechanism that's even older. This dates back to decades following the American Civil War when colonization was coming out west. But these antiquated water rights are a good example of what's killing rivers like the San Joaquin that we're seeing in our Apocalypse River reading. So, the 1,450-mile long Colorado River serves as a source of water for 7 states, but climate change and overuse have caused its levels to drop precipitously. From 2000 to 2014, flows in the river declined 19% from the 20th century average. And according to research by the American Geophysical Union, Water Resources, by 2100, the river flow could fall as much as 55% from those same averages. So we're looking at a river that is one of the most important ones and most storied ones in the American West, and has turned into one of the most at risk in our country. And that puts huge strains on a lot of different areas, from agriculture to economics, from, water rights being this antiquated first come, first serve sort of thing. And they still have water rights on it. And this is an area where, in terms of agroecology, we're growing things that nature normally wouldn't have. So it's something we have to keep in mind. Okay. So, directly or indirectly, water affects all facets of our life. Water is all around us. Oceans cover more than 70% of the Earth's surface. 97% of the water on our planet is found in oceans. Fresh water makes up only 3% of the Earth's water. And 85% of that fresh water is frozen in the polar ice caps. Water's inside every one of us, as well as all around us. If you remember your biology days, the average human is about 70% water. Most known living organisms are from 50 to 90% water. And while you can lose a whole bunch of fat and some of your proteins and a whole bunch of other things from your body, a 10 to 15% loss of your body's water will result in your death. Okay. So water is crucial for life as we know it. And so for us as humans, it plays a very central role. Water's continually moving, though. It's not staying in one place just waiting for us to dig it up. It's moving around through and above our planet. It moves as water vapor, liquid water, and ice. It's constantly changing its form, and the movement of water is referred to as the hydrologic or water cycle. You probably remember going over this in middle school or even elementary school. Precipitation, evaporation, transpiration, runoff, surface runoff, subsurface infiltration. These are all the phases of the water cycle. You probably even remember seeing something like this. Okay, so if you aren't familiar with these terms, precipitation is the falling form of water. Runoff is on the surface as it runs down before it joins lakes, rivers, streams, or seeps into the ground. When it seeps into the ground, it joins the aquifer as part of groundwater. Okay. Then the stuff that goes into lakes, rivers, streams, oceans is going to evaporate up into the air as water vapor and then condense in the form of clouds. You are also seeing evaporation of water from plants in a process known as transpiration, and that combines with the evaporation from oceans, lakes, and streams, which, as it condenses, produces heavier clouds that, as they go over mountains, things like this, or run into cold fronts, etc., you see them lose that water in the form of precipitation. So, we're going to break water into two categories: surface water and groundwater. So, surface water refers to water that remains on the Earth's surface. So, this is your rivers, streams, lakes, reservoirs, or oceans. And surface water participates in the hydrologic or water cycle, which involves the movement of water to and from the Earth's surface. There are three types of surface water that I want you to know. They are perennial, ephemeral, and man-made. Perennial or permanent means surface water that persists throughout the year and is replenished with groundwater when there's little precipitation. So these are the ones that don't really dry up. Versus ephemeral, which is a semi-permanent or surface water that exists for only part of the year. Ephemeral surface water includes creeks, lagoons, water holes. And then the last one are the man-made surface water. And this is artificial structures because of dams, human constructed wetlands, diversion channels, these types of things. That's compared to groundwater, which is the portion of the water beneath the Earth's surface that can be collected with wells, which flow naturally to the surface via seepage or springs. Groundwater doesn't exist in underground lakes, but in the pores and spaces in between what we call the alluvial materials. These alluvial materials are sand, gravel, silt, or clay, and in water bearing formations known as aquifers. Okay? So, groundwater turns out supplies drinking water for about 51% of the total US population and 99% of the rural population. If you don't live inside Eugene proper, you have a well drilled on your property, you're using groundwater. And groundwater helps to grow a lot of our food. If you guys go ahead and read through that Apocalypse River blog, you'll see that a whole bunch of our agriculture is reliant on this groundwater. 64% of groundwater is used for irrigation to grow crops. And it's an important component in many industrial processes. A lot of power plants and facilities and factories go ahead and use groundwater to help provide the water that they need to perform tasks in the factory. Groundwater is a source to recharge lakes, rivers, and wetlands as well when those surface waters are being depleted, which is becoming an increasing problem, as we saw in our case study, due to climate change leading to an increased evaporation of those surface waters due to a changing albedo effect. So we got to kind of keep that in mind as well. Now, surface water and groundwater are connected. You can't talk about one without talking about the other because the two feed into each other. While surface water can seep underground to become groundwater, groundwater can also resurface onto land and replenish surface water. Springs are formed in these locations. So these two are directly connected. So we need to talk a little bit about how much water we're dealing with. And when we measure water, we're usually doing so in a term that you may not be familiar with. It's not liters, it's not gallons. We typically use the term acre foot. So water is typically measured by an acre foot. 1 acre foot is equal to 325,851 gallons. But to give you a better picture of what that is, an acre foot of water is enough to flood a football field, which is about an acre, to a depth of 1 foot deep. And to give you a sense of how much water that is with respect to how much we use, the average California household uses between 1/2 and 1 acre foot of water per year for indoor and outdoors. Okay. So when we start looking at this, that's a lot of water. If you think about the average household is somewhere between half of that would be what, 160,000 to 325,000 gallons of water per year. That's a lot of water. So we have this term called conjunctive use. Now, conjunctive use is the coordinated management of surface water and groundwater supplies to maximize the yield of the overall water resource. An active form of conjunction uses artificial recharge, where surface water is intentionally put into or percolated or injected into aquifers for later use. So when we don't need surface water, we purposefully move it into the groundwater table. But a passive method of this is simply to rely on surface water in wet years and to use groundwater during drier years to supplement whatever missing water we can't get from the surface. So we have to ask ourselves, with as much of our planet being covered in water and as much surface water as there seems to be, why is fresh water in short supply? Well, by extracting water faster than nature can replace it, and by wasting, polluting, and underpricing this natural resource, we are using available fresh water unsustainably. And I know we all like to say, well, I'm not. I turn off the water when I brush my teeth, which is good. I let my yard go dormant in the middle of the summer, so I'm not watering it. All good, right? But there are hidden ways that we use water that lead to disparities between those who have and don't have water, as well as depleting available resources like the Colorado River that we talked about and the San Joaquin River that is in our article we're reading. because fresh water is not evenly distributed over the Earth's surfaces. Estimates show that 1 in every 9 people do not have access to clean, fresh water. And if you think about a planetary population of about 7.6, 7.8 billion people, that's a lot of people who don't have access to clean, fresh water. Now, if you've ever read National Geographic or something like that, you've probably seen an image something like this. Every day, women and girls spend 200 million hours walking to collect water for their families. That's 8.3 million days, more than 22,800 years worth of time to collect water. Yeah, now I know that's really kind of hard to wrap your head around. So instead, let's think about it this way. Many of you may have run a 5K race. Well, let's deal with 6K. Okay, 6K or 6 kilometers. That's, a little more than 3.7 miles. And that's the average distance round trip women and children in the developing world walk for water. But it's not water like you and I drink. It's water that's often contaminated with life threatening diseases. So, how far is 6,000 kilometers? 6,000 meters. Well, it's 15 laps around a football field, or twice the length of the National Mall in Washington, D.C., from the Lincoln Memorial to the steps of the U.S. Capitol and back again, or 5 times the number of steps to climb the Empire State Building. And while, yes, you probably could go ahead and do that, it would probably take you about an hour and 15 minutes to do so. But that's not how it's done in sub Saharan Africa. There are people who don't have access to an improved water source, and moms and daughters walk their 6 kilometers barefoot or in rubber sandals to collect water from polluted rivers and ponds. More than 3 million children and nearly 14 million women walk over 30 minutes to collect water. And they often have to make that trip multiple times a day. Now, maybe you've helped your parents go ahead and carry a gallon of milk from the car to the kitchen counter. Now try a gallon in each hand. Those weigh about 8.6 pounds each, and the total weight is less than half of the 44 pounds an African woman carries on her head in a 20-liter jerry can. Okay? So you see, carrying water is not just difficult, it's a lifelong pain in the neck, right? That sometimes can cause serious health problems for these individuals. Now, let's think about that jerry can on top of her head. Would that 20-liter jerry can be enough water for your whole family to drink, cook, bathe, and wash for a day? No way. 15 liters a day is considered the bare minimum water supply for one person. So, that walk that you just did that took an hour and 15 minutes, you may have to do that multiple times a day. Knowing that puts those 200 million hours in perspective of walking to get water, doesn't it? So, access is an issue. We don't all have the same access to water. Globally, we have plenty of fresh water, recycled, purified by the water cycle, but we often pollute and overuse it faster than natural processes can replenish it. And this is becoming a global economic and security issue, a health issue, and an environmental issue, as fresh water moderates climate and dilutes and removes pollutants and waste. And it's not just us that it's affecting. Around the world, migratory freshwater fish numbers are dropping faster than migratory species both on land and in the ocean. Many freshwater fish species have declined by 76% in less than 50 years. That's from 1970 to 2016, making migratory freshwater fish among the most threatened animals on the planet. Fish migrations serve a wide range of functions within their ecosystem, including the transportation of essential nutrients and larvae from one place to another. Many human populations depend on predictable migrations of these fish for their sustenance and very livelihoods. But this problem is not just with the fresh waters above ground. Groundwater infiltrates downward through the spaces in the soils and rocks. There's what's known as the zone of saturation, underground areas of soil and rock where fresh water fills the spaces between particles. You may have heard people talk about the water table, right? This is the top of the groundwater zone, and it fluctuates up and down depending on weather and removal replenishment rates. And water that is consistently found in a body of rock underground is known as an aquifer, and this holds actual flowing water. So we have surface water and we have groundwater. Remember that surface water is the fresh water from rain and melted snow stored at the surface. If we have reliable surface runoff, the surface water generally can be counted on as stable, then water is going to be available from year to year to year. One of the biggest threats to our water supply is not how we access that surface water. I know most of us think it is, and definitely we need to take care of it and watch out for it, but it's the virtual water that ends up being one of our biggest issues. This is the water that's used to produce food and other products and is a huge part of our water footprint. Anything you consume, most things that you buy, require a certain amount of water to make them. So I wanted to start by kind of giving you an idea of how much water is in certain products that we consume. Now, when I first read about this, I was kind of shocked. I love tea, right? And for me, having a cup of tea was like, oh, it's a cup of water and then the tea bag, right? Well, to produce that cup of tea, to make and refine that tea bag, unless you're growing your own tea, it takes about 35 liters of water. 35 liters of water. Figure a 2-liter bottle, right? You can visualize that. That's what? 17 of those? 18? That's a lot. That's nothing. Look at coffee, right? 140 liters of water to make 1 cup of coffee for you to drink. Apple juice, 190. Glass of wine, 120, right? And that's just drinks that we typically think of. Oh, it's mostly water. But what about when we start looking at things that are consumables and from like food? A glass of orange juice about 170. One apple is about 70 liters. One egg, right? Who doesn't like to have an egg in the morning? One egg is about 135 liters of water. Glass of milk. Oh man, one glass of milk, one glass uses 200 liters of water. And before you start thinking, oh my God, that's as bad as it's going to get, look at the hamburger. Consuming one hamburger uses about 2,400 liters of water. Because the cow has to drink, you need water to go ahead and grow the food that the cow is going to eat to get the cow fat so you can harvest the cow so you can go ahead and eat that juicy fat hamburger. So, our biggest problem with water, while I don't underplay the use of water directly, may be the virtual water that we use. Indirect use of water by buying products that use a high amount of water, which leads to water scarcity. Okay. So, water scarcity is caused by, yes, dry climate, drought, overuse, and inefficient use. So, waste is a problem. The virtual water we just talked about. And this causes stress on the system. So, freshwater scarcity stress is a calculation that compares freshwater availability to the amount used by humans. Now, you remember when we did our nature footprint, our very first environmental footprint? They said, how many Earths and what's your overshoot day? What is the day you will use up your entire year's worth of resources? We could do the same thing by taking a look at water. And over 30 countries now face freshwater scarcity stresses. This map that you see here shows freshwater availability per person in countries around the world for the year 2007. Sorry, I don't have more recent numbers. To calculate the availability of fresh water per person, specialists must take into account annual rainfall in a country and the amount of water used by households, industry, farming, and other uses, as well as the measurement of the country's area and the size of its population in that country. By studying the map, you can begin to ask and answer questions about these factors. As populations in some countries continue to rise, the number of people affected by water stress and water scarcity is expected to rise even more sharply. So, on the left of that key there, that's the color that we're really most concerned about. That's scarcity. Stress is as we get towards those lighter colors and towards vulnerability. If you look at much of the continent of Africa, it is under some sort of vulnerability, stress, or scarcity. We also look at countries with large populations in Southeast Asia. They're also threatened in terms of this water issue. Okay. So think about where your water comes from and how much water you use, not just in how much water you directly take in to do the dishes, to bathe yourself, to go ahead and drink water, but also your virtual water, the water used to make the products that you use. And there are plenty of websites out there that you can go ahead and look up and see your virtual water footprint. And hopefully you got some sense of this when you took your water footprint quiz or assessment survey yesterday or last class. Okay. All right. That's what I've got for you today. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care of yourselves.